It started with a letter in the wrong name. In August of 2023, the new owners of a two-story brick home in Birmingham, Jefferson County, Alabama opened their mailbox to find something that froze them in place. Amid the stack of bills and circulars lay an electricity invoice dated, itemized, and stamped with the name E. Kendricks. What unsettled them was not just the name itself, but what it carried. Eddie Kendricks, the legendary falsetto voice of the Temptations, had died in 1992. The husband thought it must be a clerical error, perhaps a misprint recycled from old account data. But when he compared the meter number on the paper to the actual meter fixed outside their home, the digits didn't align at all. This wasn't a copy of their bill, it was for a meter that no longer existed. Within the first minute, they realized something didn't add up. Neighbors who had lived on the street for decades weren't surprised by the discovery. A woman across the street, Ms. Yvonne, said quietly, "It's strange, but sometimes I still hear music at night, soft singing, like a man warming up his voice. Always faint, like it's coming from inside that house." She swore she had heard it as far back as the early 2000s, long after the Kendricks family had moved on. Another neighbor remembered walking his dog past the house and catching a faint whiff of cigar smoke even when the property had stood empty for nearly a year. The couple dismissed the bill as a fluke, a data entry mistake, until their first week in the house. While unpacking boxes in the den, the overhead light flicked on by itself. They checked the switch. It was down. Later that evening, the front doorbell rang twice. Their security system showed no visitors, no cars, not even a stray animal on the porch. That was when the husband brought out his phone and snapped a photo of the bill with Kendrick's name, keeping it as a quiet piece of evidence. They began documenting everything: dates, times, temperatures inside the house. They even bought a digital recorder, setting it on the mantle overnight. Most nights yielded nothing but static and air conditioning hum. But one night, at 2:17 a.m., the tape captured a faint crackle, then what sounded unmistakably like a breath taken before speaking or singing. It wasn't dramatic, not the stuff of horror films, but it was enough to keep them awake until dawn. By the end of the first week, the family had two undeniable things: a utility bill in the name of a man long gone, and a recording that suggested a human presence when no one was there. The couple didn't want to alarm anyone, not family, not friends. Instead, they chose to keep their observations private, writing everything into a small spiral notebook they kept in the kitchen drawer. The first entries were short. August 12th, 10:41 p.m., light in den switched on by itself. August 13th, 7:05 p.m., doorbell rang. No one there. But as days passed, the notes grew longer, more descriptive, more unsettled. When they cautiously brought up the odd electricity bill to Ms. Yvonne, she hesitated, then admitted something she had kept to herself for years. "Back in the early 2000s, I'd sit out on my porch in summer evenings, and I'd hear well humming. Not the radio, not neighbors, it was coming from that house. It always sounded like someone practicing, like a singer warming up. I told myself it was imagination. But then, one night in 2015, I saw lights on in the upstairs window, though the house was vacant at the time. No one was supposed to be living there." Another neighbor, an older man named Harold, mentioned hearing the same humming during early morning walks. It wasn't loud. It was more like somebody singing to themselves while pacing. The owners decided to test things in simple ways. They replaced the doorbell entirely, assuming it was a wiring issue. 2 weeks later, the new system chimed at midnight. Again, the camera revealed nothing, not a shadow, not a passing car. In the den, the wife noticed a faint cologne scent on evenings when the air felt still. It was musky, almost old-fashioned. She described it as the kind of fragrance her grandfather wore. One night she mentioned it to her husband, only for him to say he had smelled it too while alone in the hallway. Their dog, usually calm, refused to step into the living room one evening. Instead, it stood in the doorway, tail down, staring into the empty space. On another night, when the couple reviewed their digital recorder, they picked up a faint background noise that resembled the rustle of clothing. No voices, No music, just the sound of someone moving quietly through a room. By this point, the family was caught between logic and unease. Everything had rational explanations: old wiring, sensitive electronics, neighbors' stories amplified by memory. Yet the quiet persistence of the events, night after night, made the rational feel less and less convincing. By September, the house no longer felt like a place of quiet settling in. Felt observed. The owners had promised themselves that they would not give in to paranoia, that every strange sound had a rational cause. But on the third week of keeping records, their entries became harder to brush aside. One night at 1:09 a.m., the doorbell rang 3 times in quick succession. The husband jumped from bed, checked the porch, and found nothing. Later, when reviewing the video, they noticed something odd: not a person, not an animal, but the faintest flicker of shadow across the glass panel. It lasted less than a second, indistinguishable from a trick of lighting, but unsettling in the stillness of night. Frustrated, the couple decided to map out the house, room by room, documenting where each incident occurred. On a copy of the floor plan, they marked the den, the hallway, and the stairwell. All of the disturbances: flickering lights, strange scents, the sense of movement clustered in one area. The back corner of the den, a room that had once served as Eddie Kendricks' private rehearsal space, according to older neighbors. That corner, beneath a tall, narrow window, was where the humming was most often heard. In mid-September, the wife was reading on the sofa while her husband worked late. Around 11 p.m., she heard what sounded like a low, smooth whistle, 2 notes, faint but deliberate. She set her book down, holding her breath. The sound came again, from the same direction, the back corner of the den. When her husband returned, she refused to mention it at first. Only later, when reviewing the recorder from that night, they found the faint audio imprint of the whistle. It was real. That week, Harold, the dog-walking neighbor, stopped by. Without prompting, he asked, "Y'all ever hear singing in there? Like soft, almost like someone rehearsing?" The couple exchanged looks. They hadn't told anyone about their recordings. They hired a contractor to check for air vents or hidden wiring that might create whistling or humming. The ducts were old, but intact. The wiring had quirks, but nothing that explained sound patterns resembling breath, melody, or whistling. The explanation didn't satisfy. The evidence was stacking up: not dramatic, not violent, but consistent and persistent. By this stage, the couple began to ask themselves a new question: not whether something unusual was happening, but whether they should tell anyone beyond their immediate circle. The evidence was subtle, but it was real, and it all traced back to one corner of the house where Eddie Kendricks once stood, rehearsing the voice that made him famous. By October, the couple no longer treated the incidents as chance. They had settled into a rhythm of observation, logging, testing, and trying to eliminate every possible rational explanation. What began as private curiosity grew into something structured, almost like a low-budget investigation. The husband printed out floor plan sketches of the house and taped them to the refrigerator. Every night, after reviewing their notes, he placed small marks: red circles for lights flickering, blue for unexplained sounds, green for sense or movement. Over weeks, the map developed a clear pattern. The den and the stairwell landing bore the most activity. The wife began experimenting with controlled conditions. She set bowls of water in different corners to see if drafts or hidden vents disturbed the surface. The bowls in the den remained unervingly still. Yet one evening, as she recorded video, faint ripples appeared in the water as though disturbed by vibration. The air in the room was motionless. Determined to remove any technological faults, the husband went further. He disconnected the doorbell entirely, shutting off power to the unit. For several nights, the silence gave them relief until one Thursday at 12:32 a.m. when the sound of the chime rang out anyway. They checked and double-checked. The circuit was dead, wires detached. Yet both heard the unmistakable tone echo through the hallway. On the security system log, there was no entry, no trigger, no motion. Attempting audio confirmation, the couple placed 2 separate recorders in different rooms. One in the den, one upstairs on the stairwell landing. For nights, the results were nothing more than hums of appliances. Then on October 14th, at almost the same time, both recorders picked up sound. The den's microphone caught a faint sequence of 2 notes, a whistle followed by a hum. The stairwell's recorder, seconds later, caught what seemed like the quiet scrape of a shoe sole on wood. The couple replayed the files repeatedly, testing for feedback, but the timing was too precise. One sound seemed to respond to the other. Neighbors' new observations. Around this time, Ms. Yvonne reported that while watering her front yard at dusk, she saw a flicker of light in the upstairs window, though she knew the curtains had been drawn. It wasn't a shadow, she explained carefully. It was more like someone had walked in front of a lamp. Except there's no lamp in that room anymore. Harold, the dog walker, added his own detail. Twice on early mornings, his dog tugged toward the Kendricks house and growled low. He's never done that anywhere else on this street, he remarked. Only there. By now, the couple felt the tension in subtle ways. They spoke in lower voices in the house, moving more carefully, as though trying not to disturb something unseen. The wife confessed she avoided the den after dark, even with the lights on. The husband, once skeptical, admitted that every time he passed the stairwell, he had the irrational feeling of someone waiting at the landing, just out of sight. Still, they continued to test because proof mattered more than fear. Residual energy, some suggested the sounds and scents were leftover residual imprints from Kendrick's time there, like echoes preserved in the structure. Electromagnetic fields. An investigator they contacted explained that fluctuating EM fields in old wiring can cause feelings of unease, even auditory hallucinations. But when asked how EM interference could produce a name on a utility bill 3 decades later, the expert had no answer. The couple had moved beyond coincidence. Their experiments, simple, controlled, repeatable, had produced evidence. Sounds captured on multiple devices, a doorbell that rang after being disabled, neighbors reporting the same sights and sounds across years. Each rational explanation covered some details, but not all. The notebook in the kitchen drawer was now half full. The red and blue circles on the house diagram were thick, layered, like a map of something invisible. And the question was no longer if something remained in Eddie Kendrick's old home, but why it lingered at all. By late autumn, the couple's home had transformed into something halfway between a residence and an archive. The kitchen drawer that once held receipts and coupons now contained the spiral notebook, neatly filled with dates, times, and descriptions. Their phone was crowded with recordings. On the refrigerator, the floor plan was thick with colored circles. They had not invited ghost hunters or sensational television crews. Instead, they stuck to their calm, methodical approach: observe, record, compare. And yet, despite their discipline, the line between the provable and the unexplainable grew harder to hold. One evening in November, both of them were seated in the den watching television, when they heard it clearer than before. A voice. It wasn't a full song. Just 3 soft syllables, drifting like a note hummed under someone's breath. The husband muted the TV instantly, and for several seconds, silence pressed into the room. Then the faint scent of the old-fashioned cologne moved through the air. They both smelled it. They both froze. The recorder on the mantel later confirmed the sound. 3 distinct notes, the second higher than the first, the third lower, in a sequence that resembled the start of a melody. At this point, they stepped back and tried to categorize everything. What could be explained rationally? Lights flickering due to outdated wiring. Whistling sounds possibly linked to air ducts. Neighbors' testimony colored by memory and suggestion. What could be explained bureaucratically? The electricity bill in Eddie Kendrick's name may have been a system glitch, an archived file accidentally resurfacing. What remained unresolved? The disabled doorbell ringing with no power. Audio recordings that contained timed, melodic sounds. The repeated reports of humming and cologne, corroborated by multiple people over years. The neighbor's perspective. In casual conversations, neighbors admitted they were relieved someone lived in the house again. They described it as a property that didn't like to be empty. One woman phrased it more gently: it just remembers him. That's all. The house remembers. The couple never declared the home haunted. They avoided the word entirely. Instead, they framed it as unresolved activity. The wife, in her careful handwriting, noted in the notebook's margin. Some things are explainable, some are not. Both can be true. The husband added his own line beneath hers. What's proven is not always what matters. What lingers is what we feel. Closing balance. In the end, what we can prove about Eddie Kendricks' former home is simple. The house contains quirks of wiring, structure, and history that create odd experiences. Lights flicker, sounds travel. Old bills sometimes resurface. These things have explanations. What remains unclear is more fragile. The moments when technology records a melody, when scents drift without source, when neighbors hear the echo of a singer long gone. And perhaps that is the balance between memory and evidence, between structure and story. The truth of the haunting may not be a ghost at all, but the persistence of a man's voice, echoing faintly in the very place where he once stood and sang. By December, the couple decided to stop testing. They had enough notes, enough late nights listening to recordings that raised more questions than answers. The house was no longer just a home to them, it had become a quiet archive of patterns, sounds, and memories. And while curiosity had driven them for months, they realized they could not live fully at ease if every night was spent chasing proof. The last entry in their notebook is dated December 3, 2023. That night, they had dinner with friends and returned home just after 10. As they set their coats down in the hallway, the old doorbell chimed once clear, unmistakable. The husband pointed out that the system was still disconnected, the wires neatly capped in the basement. His wife wrote simply, "He wanted to be noticed tonight." They never reconnected the bell after that. From then on, the couple chose to live alongside the strangeness instead of fighting it. The den became their reading room, the stairwell no longer avoided. When the faint cologne drifted through, they opened a window but did not comment. When the recorder picked up another soft hum weeks later, they let it play once and then deleted the file. "It doesn't feel dangerous," the wife explained. "It feels like something left over, a piece of a life that was lived here." Neighbors' closing reflections. The neighbors seemed almost relieved by their acceptance. Ms. Yvonne told them that voice, it always made people feel good. If it's still around, maybe that's a blessing, not a curse. Harold put it more simply, some houses keep echoes. That one, it just sings. So what can we prove? We can prove that old wiring and electronics malfunction. We can prove that memories can color what people hear and see. We can prove that bureaucratic errors can send bills in the wrong names, even decades later. But what remains unclear are the details that overlap too neatly, too persistently. The melodic hums caught on tape, the unexplained scent of cologne, the doorbell ringing without power, and the fact that neighbors independently recalled the same experiences across years. In the end, perhaps the haunting of Eddie Kendricks' house isn't about fear at all. It's about presence, the kind that lingers when a person's voice was once so powerful, so recognizable, that even silence can't erase it. The couple still lives there. They do not call it haunted. They simply say it has character. And when the air turns still in the den at night, and a faint sound rises as if from the walls themselves, they pause, not frightened, but listening. Because sometimes, a song doesn't end when the singer is gone. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you liked this story.